Welcome everyone to Transformation Thursdays. I am so excited to share my lunch hour with you, and thank you so much for sharing your lunch hour with me. So we've had a great run. We've got one more Transformational Thursday to go, and I wanted to share uh, a few topics with you today. The topic I wanted to share is the first one is remote leadership. A lot of leaders are asking for tips on how to lead during COVID-19, and these tips can be applied to any other disruption of business that you experience. So let's start with remote leadership. And if you haven't done so already, all of our recordings are available on my YouTube channel, Dr. Patricia Anderson. It's on my Facebook page, Dr. Patricia Anderson. It's on other places. So feel free to revisit the recordings to catch up on what we're talking about in this boot camp in terms of transformational leadership, or authentic transformational leadership, to be honest. So in terms of remote leadership, it looks the same as if you're leading non-remotely, but you just really have to be intentional about especially how you communicate to your followers, to your employees, to your partners, to your customers, etc. So I posted these 4 things on the blog that I wrote a few weeks ago about transformational leadership during COVID-19. The first thing you want to do is diminish fear and ambiguity. There's a lot of information going around. People are glued to their televisions and the internet. People are fearful. There's ambiguity around how long this is going to last, what the impact is, when the curve is going to be flattened, and so forth. So you want to make sure that you're diminishing any type of fear and ambiguity around COVID-19 and its effects. One of the ways to do that is to instill stability. You want to communicate to your employees and your stakeholders that even though things are unstable around you, that your operations, your leadership will continue to be stable. Work as they know it will be stable. And then, of course, you want to institute an infrastructure that will allow stability with them. You also, this is really important, you want to move the needle to the future state. So everyone is living in the current state of what's going on with COVID-19, how is it affecting me, what's the long-term effects, and so forth. You want to move the needle to a future state of operations, because we are going to come out of this crisis, and you want to focus individuals on what the future state looks like. Maybe it'll look the same to some organizations, maybe it'll be different, but there's a communication that should be going on around what that future state is. You want to ensure that your stakeholders feel cared for. And lastly, we talked about that authentic transformational leaders are not only concerned about their stakeholders, but also their stakeholders, and that they're feeling cared for and heard during this time, and their input is being considered. What their needs and wants are a priority to the leaders. The other thing to do in terms of remote leadership is to pivot to virtual proximity. There's a lot of social distancing going on. There, right now, as I'm speaking, there are concurrent soft opens to different businesses, states, countries, and what have you. You want to make sure that you are communicating to your stakeholders what that looks like. Is it incremental? What are you doing to support the soft openings as we go through? And then finally, I want to say, and I've said in the post, is to learn. This is a great time for leaders to learn, capture lessons learned, capture opportunities for improvement, capture what worked well, what didn't work so well, so that the next time you face a crisis, which most certainly will do. You are prepared as much as you can be prepared. So those are some thoughts on remote leadership. Be sure to read the blog on leadership during COVID-19 and beyond to get more context around this. So we did a poll this past week, and we asked individuals to share any topics of interest that they wanted to see covered during this lunch and lead rather, Thursdays. And fear came up several times. They are wondering two things, right? They're wondering, what if you are fearful as a leader? And kudos to you for putting that out there, because being vulnerable, as we spoke about last week, is an asset. To a degree, obviously. Your stakeholders want to see that you are vulnerable. You're not Superman or Superwoman. I'll use the quote that Henry Ford used when he was asked by a reporter about a particular topic in his industry, in his business. And his response was, you can ask me any questions you want. I'll have an answer to you in a matter of minutes. And Henry Ford, of course, did not have all the answers. However, he surrounded himself with knowledge workers. These are individuals who have strengths and knowledge in certain areas. So he, as a leader, was able to call upon them to share their knowledge. So take a page out of his book. Surround yourself as a leader with individuals with the answers, because you're not required to know all the answers. However, you're required to get the answers as soon as possible. And you do that by surrounding yourself with individuals who are very knowledgeable about different topics that you may or may not be. The other type of fear that I heard from you is that, so the first is you're fearful, and you wanted to prevent yourself from instilling fear in your stakeholders. That's a very, what's the word that I want to use in terms of driving fear into individuals? It's so old and command and control, and not what leadership should look like in this 21st century. So you want to ensure that you as a leader, you are not instilling fear in your stakeholders. A question that was asked early on was that, is it okay to instill fear in the short term to have some gains in terms of getting everyone on the same page, and then resume, whatever your leadership style was prior to that? And of course, I'm advocating authentic transformational leadership, which does not promote using fear. Being honest about what's happening, and then with honesty, couple that with what your plan or approach is to deal with a situation that might be like what we have going on. We have a crisis going on. Okay, here's what's going on. Honesty. This is what's going on. This is what I plan on doing to address, mitigate, wrap arms around, right size the crisis. So you want to be honest. And on that note, we got a lot of responses, right? So you have some leaders that may act like they're know-it-alls, and they're not really listening. And we'll talk about that with the emotional intelligence piece, that you're listening to your stakeholders, and you're not presenting yourself as knowing everything about everything, because anytime you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're losing credibility, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. We talked about that several times. So you want to be open to hearing from your stakeholders, all of them, in terms of their concerns, their suggestions, and so forth. So you want to not lead at any time by fear. If there's fear, you want to address it, but you also want to communicate, this is how we're going to deal with that fear. But that fear should not be coming from you as a tool, as a motivator, as anything. Okay, so authentic transformational leaders do not have fear in their toolbox, in their repertoire. Um, so in terms of dealing with fear, I have some tips here that you can use, leverage. You want to decide what your leadership style is, right? You want to decide what type of leadership you are, what the type of leader you are. Are you authentic transformational? And then if you are you, excuse me, if you are transformational, if you are you authentic transformational? Are you transactional? Are you laissez-faire, or are you pseudo transformational? So once you decide what your leadership style is, authentic transformational, you're going to communicate that style. So you're going to say, this is, as a leader, this is what my primary leadership style is, right? And communicate the style to your stakeholders. This is what you can expect from me as an authentic transformational leader. And we talked about what that looks like, the 4 I's. Please go back and review the videos in terms of communicating the style, right? You also want to be authentic. That's one of the hallmarks of authentic transformational leaders. You also want to know your strengths. As I said earlier, you want to know that you know what you know, and we talked about the concentric circles. You know what you know. So that's the smallest circle. So what you know is the smallest circle that there is. You have known knowns, which is what you know. You have unknown knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. So the circle is huger than what you know. So know your strengths. Leverage your team. Spoke about that already. Know what their strengths are, and you want to leverage them. Be intentional about leveraging them in ways that will maximize and show their strengths, right? There were some questions about confidence versus arrogance. So confidence is great, 100% recommended. However, being arrogant, and an example of that is not listening to other point of views because you feel that as a leader, you know everything. And that's where you want to position yourself as a learning leader. I don't know everything, and I'm open to learning. And the last thing, the last two things is that everyone's not going to be happy with your leadership style. If you're trying to make everyone happy, you're going to find yourself going from style to style to style to style. So you want to make sure that you understand that you're going to be critiqued, criticized, put down, and that's par for the course if you are a leader. So everyone will not be happy. And finally, I want to reiterate that you are a learning leader. You're learning as you're leading. Be open to it. So fear was one of the topics that individuals wanted to see addressed. And feel free to email me at drp@atl.team. And the email addresses I gave you before, they're all valid still. Learning to find a way to make it easy to communicate with me, drp@atl.team. That's the easiest, right? The other topic that came up in terms of interest in learning more as a leader is communications. And one of the things that you want to be aware of is your own communications. Before you communicate with others, you want to be very versed in your own communications, how you communicate, your facial expressions. I'm very expressive with my face when I communicate, so I'm aware of that, and sometimes I may need to temper it so it's not communicating the wrong message to the room. And speaking of the room, you want to read the room. You want to ensure that you're also reading the facial expressions and the body language of the individuals in the room. And room, of course, is virtual, that you are communicating with. Being self-aware. A lot of leaders, what they do, for example, if they have a big face-to-face meeting, they'll practice, not in front of the mirror, but they tape themselves, because when you are in front of the mirror, your brain adjusts to what you should be doing in the mirror. So it's real time. But if you do it on a video, then you can go back and look at it and see what you need to adjust. So the self-awareness is not as present in the mirror as it is when you record it and then watch yourself, make the corrections, record again. And then you don't want to be too robotic or too formulated when you do that, right? You still want to let yourself, your persona, your personality shine through. You have to, in terms of reading the room, identify what the optimal communication style is for that room, for that topic, for the impact, and so forth. So you want to be versatile in your communications. You want to identify your communication strengths. Maybe you're better orally or verbally. Maybe you're better at written communications. Whatever it is, identify those strengths and, capitalize and leverage on those strengths, right? And then finally, you want to learn how to communicate better, learn how to communicate effectively. And in terms of communication, it's not just about you communicating, it's about your organization, how that communications look to the public. So for example, last time we talked about underscoring and relaunching your brand. That's communications, right? Your campaign during and beyond COVID-19, that's communications. The public is watching this type of communication and they're weighing in on it. Ensure that you're well equipped with diversity and inclusion in your organization, so they have multiple viewpoints and not just one viewpoint that you're communicating to your stakeholders and to the public. You want multiple viewpoints that shows diversity and inclusion. You want to identify emerging leaders. A hallmark of or a tenet of authentic transformational leaders is that they replicate themselves, that they're looking for leaders to emerge during their leadership tenure. And that's where their corporate entrepreneurship comes into play. A lot of industries, a lot of companies are leveraging corporate entrepreneurship, where you have these emerging leaders or these other leaders owning an initiative or owning a business division and giving them the resources and the sponsorship to operate autonomously, showing them that you trust them. And that's another communication style, trust. I didn't have this as a topic, but some of our viewers, well, it's communications, so it is. They spoke about having leaders who share, maybe overshare to different employees, and the employees speak to each other, and then there's an element of mistrust, because now they're feeling, if you're speaking to this employee about another employee, then I don't trust you. So as a leader, you have to understand that of course you're going to like some people more than others. That's human nature, because we're still humans, right? However, you don't want to overstep and then you find yourself confiding in an employee about another employee, because the employees are going to talk, right? They're going to talk about leaders ad nauseum. That's what employees do. That's what stakeholders do. So you want to make sure that you're not sending the wrong message by showing that you are not someone to be trusted, right? There's certain topics that should occur only among leaders, right? And that came up. So you want to make sure that you're not communicating the wrong message to your stakeholders. Building agility. If you're an organization, you want to demonstrate to your stakeholders that you are agile, that's a communicating. If they're looking for an organization that's agile in their decision making or their practices, they're looking at you. So I'm not going to go through this entire list. We talked about this last week. However, these are ways to communicate effectively and positively. So considering your stakeholders, that's on this list again. Eliminating silos, that's on this list, excuse me. I had this cough before COVID-19, just want to make clear. That is, it's been before, it's chronic. And we talked about transformational strategy. If you have a place in your organization that pursues ongoing transformation, that's communicating that you are, again, ahead of the curve, you're on top of things, you are strategic in your efforts. Pause. I'm back with a cough drop, so please excuse the cough drop, but I have a coughing spell there. Again, not COVID-19 related, have had it for a few months prior to COVID-19, but everything is okay. So in terms of a transformational strategy, one of the things that I did in my research is wanting to find out what the perception of the leadership was, because perception is reality, right? What they're perceiving as a leader translates into their reality. So you want to manage that perception by being intentional about having a place in your organization that pursues ongoing transformation, right? Leaders are learners. All right. Um, so these are all communication strategies, right? So it's not just verbal or written, it's everything about your organization, about yourself that's communicated to the public. So these are the 4 I's that we talked about in terms of transformational leadership. And again, or authentic transformational leadership. Again, this is how you communicate as an authentic transformational leader. Idealize influence, a connection between your stakeholders. Inspirational motivation, very important during this crisis. Individualized consideration, that's the emotional intelligence that I want to talk about in a minute. And then intellectual stimulation, right? Engaging your stakeholders into critical thinking and collaboration and innovation, very, very necessary during this time. Emotional intelligence, let's talk about that, right? That's your ability to connect with your stakeholders and connect in a real way, in a way that they deem to be authentic, right? So one of the first things that I want to talk about in terms of emotional intelligence is that you have to be intentional about your interactions with your stakeholders. Um, and you want to ensure that, again, they're feeling cared for. We talked about that. And, you know, authentically, that they feel that you care about them, not just lip service, but you're backing up um, your caring with actions. All right. So be intentional. Know thyself. So what you want to know is how you are from an emotional standpoint, right? Do you fly off the handle? Are you patient? Are you you feel more collaborative with certain individuals? Understand where you are in terms of where your emotions reside, right? So the better you know yourself, the better you're able to communicate emotionally with others and connect emotionally with others. I wanted to bring out this quote from Stephen Covey: seek first to understand than to be understood. So emotional intelligence is always about seeking to understand than to be understood. So you want to seek to understand the person before you are seeking to be understood. And that's another thing that came up during this week with the individuals that are on this transformational leadership journey, is that their leader was promoting, and sometimes you have to do that as a leader. You want to be understood because this is critical and you want to move the needle, right? However, their leader was 100% always wanting to be understood than to understand the viewpoint of the stakeholder. And there's frustration. They shut down, the stakeholder will shut down and not engage. And then they seem like they're not interested because it's futile when you have a leader that's, forever pushing their viewpoint and not open to your viewpoint. So seek first to understand than to be understood, according to Stephen Covey. And he has 7 habits of highly effective people. That's a good one. Um, Research has shown that sometimes there's an inverse relationship between high IQ, which is traditional IQ, and high EQ, which is emotional quotient. So the research is such as this, that the more intelligent people are traditionally, the less emotionally intelligent they are. So there's an inverse relationship. So once they have achieved a certain level of intelligence, um, and still in that small circle, right? The known knowns, it's still the smallest circle. It doesn't matter how high your IQ is, you're still in that smallest circle. And they may feel that they have this vast amount of knowledge and they're not open to input from other individuals. So that's where the inverse relationship comes in. And even with that substantial amount of knowledge that these individuals with high IQ have, it's usually directed to certain specific areas. It's not broad. It's certain areas that they are proficient and knowledgeable about. And then the last tip that I want to put on here is to learn. Leaders are learners. So they're continually learning about themselves and learning about the individuals or the stakeholders that they lead. And I put that piece of the authentic transformational leadership on the slide, the individual consideration, because it does speak to emotional intelligence, that you're emotionally able to connect with your stakeholders in order to understand them better. So the connection is twofold. The connection has to be palpable. They have to feel that you're connecting with them, and that has to do with your EQ. It has to do with your communication style. It has to do with your body language. It has to do with the frequency and the mode of communications that you do. It has to do even with your language that you use. They have to feel that the connection is there. Once they feel the connection, then you can speak into them, right? Then they're going to be listening because they feel that this individual gets me. They listen to me. I'm valuable to my leader, right? So I want to also point out two things. At the top of this lunchtime, which I'm taking my lunch hour to share this with you, um, at the top of this, what I pointed out is that some theorists believe that authentic transformational leadership and pseudo transformational leadership are polar opposites. And when you look at the behavior characteristics, they look like they're polar opposites. However, as I pointed out, is that at the very beginning of leadership, authentic transformational leadership and pseudo transformational leadership, they look the same. And in terms of emotional intelligence, both leaders are connecting to their stakeholders. They are seeking first to understand, then to be understood. They have that high EQ, and the stakeholders holders feel a connection. And then in turn, they trust that leader. And then somewhere along the line, and this is not bad or good, it's just a fact. Once you develop a certain level of trust in an individual, you stop being exercising critical thinking because you trust them. So you're saying, oh, I trust Bob. So if Bob is saying so and so, then I'm going to go with it. I don't have to, second guess it or go behind and fact check. And that's where the pseudo transformational leaders are able to gain ground, because they're counting on you to rely on the trust so that it can slowly boil the frog, right? So be mindful that you are not, as a leader, capitalizing on that trust that your stakeholders have in you. And if you think about it, if you have that individualized consideration, and let me go back to what I shared before. Getting a lot of messages come in as I'm speaking, so if I seem distracted, that's why. Okay, so we have idealized influence, inspirational motivation, individualized consideration, intellectual stimulation. If you and you have these in measures, right? So you want to measure how much of this that you have, number one, and how much of it you're going to exercise in your leadership. And different tenures, different times in your tenure requires different amounts of these four, right? However, research has shown, and idealized influence and inspirational motivation, if they are the highest of the four, that's where you tend to go into pseudo transformational leadership. Because if you think about it, if there's a connection between you and the stakeholders, if you're able to inspire them and communicate the vision so clearly that you galvanize them, then you can actually lead them down the wrong path. So you're going to keep a watchful eye on the balance of these criteria in your leadership behavior. So just want to point that out. Let's get back to emotional intelligence. So understanding how you communicate, and it all ties in, understanding how you communicate to your stakeholders, understand your communication style, knowing yourself, being open to learning. Leaders are learners, so they're going to learn as they go. They never reach the pinnacle of learning where they have arrived. And I'm going to say one last thing is that Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, it's good to revisit that. Even though it's dated, it's still it still is something that we can use today as leaders. And you your journey up the pyramid, if you will, you should also look at the journey of your stakeholders, that they are ascending as well as you are. And of course, the very basic needs are what we are focused on today in our world, because we want to make sure individuals are cared for in terms of health wise. They have what they need to, I guess, function in a limited environment where they're not able to uh, go out in public and frequent places that they would before. So that biggest, broadest base of the pyramid or the triangle is where the focus is. But as we move through COVID-19 and any other crises, you want to ensure that they have that stability in order to build on the other levels to reach the highest level, which is self-actualization. And that's where you as a leader, that's where you come in, is in ensuring that you understand your stakeholders, especially your employees and your followers, and that you're capitalizing on their strengths, you're leveraging opportunities for them to shine as well, for them to help you lead, for them to advise you as a leader, for them to be um, a a knowledge repository that you can refer to answer questions. So those are the topics that came up this week: the fear, the remote leadership, emotional intelligence, and communications. If you have other topics, feel free to drop me a line, Dr. P at atl.team. You can go to my Facebook page and communicate there. The website is drpatriciaanderson.com. So feel free to communicate with me. We have one more boot camp to go, which is next Thursday during lunchtime. Again, I take my lunch hour, not eating, coughing a lot, but not eating, and to share what I know, smaller circle, about authentic transformational leadership, in particular, pseudo-transformational leadership and the whole transformational leadership model. So hopefully you're gaining some knowledge from this that you're able to execute, hone your skills, and that you're better for this learning. Thank you for the appreciation. Keep coming. And we'll see you next Thursday for the final lunch and lead transformational leadership sessions. So see you next Thursday. And I'll talk to you before then, hopefully. Bye.